Meet Bob Olson. Bob's the author of Answers About the Afterlife and the host of Afterlife TV. A private investigator who began investigating life after death in 1999, Bob now records his interviews with experts, authors, and people who've had extraordinary experiences so he can share it all with you. Enjoy the show.
Hey everybody, Bob Olson here with Afterlife TV. You can find us at afterlifetv.com. This is where we search for evidence of life after death and ask the meaningful questions around that subject. Today we're going to be talking about channeling. Specifically, our guest, we're going to talk about his channeling and how it will teach you about your own knowing and worth. Something all of us need to learn, and certainly something I think you're going to enjoy today, to learn a little bit more about yourself. And his name is Paul Selig. Is it Selig, correct?
That's correct.
Well, welcome so much. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I should let everybody know. So I was aware of you. You were on my peripheral vision, and channeling. I tend to focus more on mediums and stuff like that because we deal with a lot of people with grief. Channeling was there. It was certainly fascinating to me. And, but, I never ended up calling you up because of that reason. I was more focused in other areas. I happened to be watching The Unexplained. It was a great, who was that, Sci-Fi? Who was that?
That was the Bio Channel.
The Bio Channel. Sorry, Bio. We love the Bio Channel. And so it was a little documentary series. I was watching it because my friend John Holland was on there. And so he got me started on it. And then I saw you, and my wife Melissa. I'm like, whoa, who is this guy? This guy's the real deal. This is channeling. She wasn't that familiar with it. This is what channeling is, Melissa. And then I knew about you ever since. I knew I was going to have you on one day. And then just about a week ago or so, I couldn't get you out of my head. I'm driving along. I'm interviewing you in my head. And I'm like, all right, I guess I got to interview this guy. So anyways, thanks for coming on.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about, why you're doing what you're doing. I know you have a little background story for that. And I know, it wasn't where you thought you were going. So it's an interesting story.
I was raised not to believe in much of this stuff. When I was about 25, I started to open up psychically and didn't quite know what was happening. I started seeing lights around people after having had an experience. And then I studied healing, and I found out that when I had my hands on people, I started to hear things for them. Wow. So I was opening up as a clairaudient, and then I started to open up as a physical empath. So what you saw me do on The Unexplained was a lot sort of stepping into other people's bodies and fields, and I'll often sort of begin to take on their stuff. But that came a little bit later. It came in increments. So I started to do a group in my apartment, maybe 20 years ago, when I first began to hear things, and just sit with my friends or whoever wanted to show up and be in the energy, because the energy that would come through when I channeled was very, very palpable. And as I continued to do this,
No, go ahead.
No, it just, the station got a bit more refined. And I didn't even realize that I was lecturing in channel until about 4 years ago. When my guides turned to somebody else in my group and said, Paul's not going to believe what's coming through him until he sees it written down. It was around that time that I began to record and transcribe the teachings. So it's really very, very recent, although I've been at this for a while.
And I found that fascinating. I heard that, I read it, and that you weren't going to believe it until you saw it written down. And I assumed that what that meant was, when you are channeling, you're not really remembering what you're channeling later. And so to actually see it written down gave you this tangible memory of what you had just done. Is that sort of the idea?
Kind of. When I channel, I whisper the words as they come, and then I repeat them. So it's like I'm reading fortune cookies, one after the other, and I'm trying to keep up with the dictation. Yeah. So I'm always hearing the next line as the one out of my mouth is being repeated. But I never know what the whole thought's going to be, or the whole sentence or paragraph. I'm just trying to keep up with it. So when you see it written out, you actually can see the coherence of the lecture. And I was floored the first time I typed one up. It was like a 5-page lecture. It required absolutely no editing. It was completely perfect. It made great sense. And after I did that for about a month or so, the guide said, okay, we have a book to write. And that's how the book came through, too. I mean, really, the whole thing is recorded and then transcribed. And the rule with the books is I can't edit. I can't take out the stuff that doesn't feel right or might make somebody angry. The deal is, if this is what comes out of my mouth, it goes into the manuscript, like it or not.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I mean, that's beautiful. And in the first book, you did, what, about 2.5 weeks?
First book was 2.5 weeks, yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful. As a writer myself, boy, that just sounds great. To be able to write a book in 2.5 weeks. Let's show your books right now. We'll show them all. We'll talk about them as we go along. So this is the first one here, right? I am the Word. I'm going to try to get that there. And that's the one that was written in about 2.5 weeks. I know this one did really, really well. Tell us a little bit about it.
It's a teaching of embodiment. I mean, the guides, the very first session, the guides, first of all, I wasn't expecting it to happen. So I heard, we have a book to write. If you take 2 weeks, we'll deliver it. And I had nothing else to lose at that moment in my life. And Victoria Nelson, who's a colleague of mine at Goddard College, where I run a master's program, I called her at an appointed time every 2 weeks and just delivered the text. But in the very first or second session, they said, this is the beginning of a trilogy. And really, the whole thing is a trilogy of embodiment, of sort of how we, I think, as a species, is really being upgraded to claim our own divine expression, the true self of who we are. And how it came to be. The first book was the first teaching. And the books, I should say, according to my guides, are energetic attunements to the frequency that they work with. So the books are operating on 2 different levels. The words on the page, which gives you an intellectual context for what's happening, but the vibration that informs it is really very strong, and for many, many people, very palpable. So they said this is going to be a book that works directly on the reader. And it has been, and so's the second, and so's the third. But I am the Word, that really is where they lay out the foundation of their teaching, and they attune the reader to the frequency that they work with. They call it the Word, which they say their definition is the energy of the Creator in action. Okay.
All right. And so for anybody who might be a little confused, so channeling is you're communicating, you call them your guides, right? But is this some group entity? What is this?
They come through saying we, so I consider them a group entity. I don't see them. I kind of wish I did. I mean, I see orbs. I see these lights that come into the room. It's a very physical experience for me very often when I'm channeling, because I'm something of a physical medium. But they say that they're teachers, and they've really come at this time to show us who we are. So once in a while, they'll deliver a name, but they're really not all that invested in names. I think the names get a little stuck in personality stuff. And it's really much more, I think, about the teaching than the teacher. Or I think that's how they would like to have it. I'm mostly the guy that sits in the chair. That's my job.
Yeah, that's all you do. And then, but I mean, that's the humble approach to it for certain, because you don't want to put you don't really want to put any of yourself in these. They don't want you to put any of yourself in these. I know one of the books I was looking at was talking a little bit about how that can happen. Like, with Edgar Casey, his beliefs, that sort of thing can bleed onto the page sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I'm present for these things. I'm a conscious channel. I'm taking the dictation, as it comes, but I'm also present enough that I can interrupt and question. So when I bleed through, I tend to be bleeding through on purpose. Are there times that I feel more receded than others? I would say yes. I mean, there are times, because I'm reading the audiobook now, and I'm sitting in a booth reading this stuff aloud, not whispering and repeating it, and I'm astonished at I'm astonished at the construction of it. I mean, the whole thing feels built like somebody really sat down and wrote it. And really, I was sitting there in a chair with my dog in my lap and a CD recorder, and sometimes pacing the room with a phone receiver in my hand, because I've got this poor woman in Berkeley on the other end of the phone, as I'm dictating. So when I see that, I'm sort of astonished by the purity of the work. There's other times when I go, gosh, I feel too present here. But mostly when I feel present, the guides call me out and they'll say, Paul is interrupting, or Paul's getting in the way. And there's a couple of times I actually had to stop cold during the dictation. I leave those interruptions in there. Those are the only edits. When something interrupts and I start cursing, that doesn't wind up in the transcript. But I never know what's going to happen in these things. I don't know the title of the book or the chapter or anything. So I don't know it until it's delivered. And it's sort of scary that way. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
But there's an awareness every time that the entire book could fall apart. If they delivered something that made no sense, then what am I going to do? The deal is that I can't take it out because suddenly they said something that was absolutely crazy, or that I would think would be absolutely crazy.
Right.
And it's possible right now that I'm sort of just thinking aloud, it's possible that they're somewhat limited in what they can deliver through me, because if it's just too out there, I may not be able to render it. And I think to a certain extent, they're using my consciousness, my vocabulary to work through. Right. Occasionally they'll use a word that I don't know, and Victoria will know. Occasionally they'll use a word that I think is completely the wrong word, and I'll look it up and find out that it's actually the archaic meaning of the word, from 400 years ago, and so, that's interesting that they used that word.
Yeah.
But for the most part, they're still dealing with Paul. Paul is the vehicle or the radio that the broadcast is playing through. And I think, to that element, is there a piece of me or aspects of me that can be informing some of this perhaps, but not the teaching itself?
Yeah, I like that. And I think they picked a great guy. They wouldn't choose me, but you're a Yale, you got your master's at Yale, right?
I did, yeah.
And you're a playwright, and you teach writing?
I teach playwriting at NYU. I've taught that 25 years, and I run a graduate program at Goddard College in Vermont, and I've done that for close to 20. So I've been an academic for a long time.
Yeah.
And because of that, I was very low-key about this work. It was really the first book that threw me out. And then when The Unexplained happened, and I had to tell my college kids, I said, I don't know if you know this about me. And they said, yeah, we know. They checked me out on Google. And, I look pretty crazy when I'm channeling, and they were still in my class and fine. Yeah. So I'm very grateful for that.
No, that is nice, but it was risky. It was courageous of you to do that. Did you do it because you felt like this was your calling? You had no other choice, or are you just really courageous?
What really, if you really want to know what happened, I was working on a show as a writer, and I got let go of, and I went to bed for 2 days, and my ego was just sort of quashed. Yeah. And that's when my friend Victoria called me up and she said, Paul, I think it's time that you wrote your book about how you became a clairaudient. And I didn't want to, and the guides piped in and said, no, we have a book to write, and if you take 2 weeks, we'll do it. And in that moment, I could have cared less. Yeah. I thought, why the hell not? Who cares?
Yeah.
If I was still on that show, none of these books would have happened. I'm convinced. So, foolishness, perhaps at the time, it didn't matter. But courage didn't enter into it. The first book, for me, was an experiment to see if this could actually really happen as they said. Yeah. And I didn't know that it could. Yeah. And then it did happen, and they said, it's the first publisher, don't haggle. And that's exactly what happened. The first editor who read the book read it on a plane and pretty much said, we want to publish this right after. It was sort of, within 8 months, it was on the shelves after having been dictated. So it was fascinating. It's happened quickly.
Yeah, I'll say. And yeah, I can see how it would be really cool. I'm that guy who, I have all my questions. I don't necessarily need them, but I like to have them, and I like to stay organized. And yeah, that would really push my limits if they were like, yeah, we're going to write a whole book, and we're just going to dictate it to you, and we'll have it all in the right order. I'm like, yeah really?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But that's what I did too. But then I showed up for it, and that's the difference.
Yeah.
My job is to show up. What happens after that, in some ways, is pretty much out of my hands.
That's right. The second book, let's show them that. The Book of Love and Creation. Yeah. There we go. Beautiful. These covers are, oh my God, I love the covers. Yeah. The publisher did a great job. And tell us a little bit about that book. That's the second one.
It's a second book. It's a manual. They almost called it the Manual of Love and Creation. And then I went, because I hate the word manual. And they called it the Book of Love and Creation like 2 sentences later. This is all in the book.
Yeah.
But it really is the manual of how to operate at a higher frequency and how to stop operating in fear. And much of what we do is fear-based, but we don't even consider it as such because we're so used to it. Either we've been sort of taught in certain ways, or we're adhering to structures that we've all agreed to that are fear-based. So it's really a manual on operating at a higher level, and it's a dense book, but in many ways it's a workbook.
Yeah, and I love it. So in the first one the first book, I Am the Word, talks about those structures that brought us to fear, right?
Uh-huh.
And then so now this is like opening us up to a new level. Beautiful. And now you've come out with this one. This is a new one, just out,
Check it out.
still hot on the press. The Book of Knowing and Worth. This is one I really want to talk about. Now, in some ways, I think they even say, your guys even say, this may even be, the most important of all of them. Why would that be?
It's my favorite of the books. I don't remember why they say it's the most important.
Well, they don't. And maybe I got that wrong. So, but
no, I think they do infer that. I think in some ways it's the most radical of the teachings.
Yeah.
I mean, what they're really talking about is they call it a teaching of incarnation. I Am the Word, they say, is about embodiment. It's about bringing the energy in. The Book of Love and Creation is about how to begin to learn how to operate the car. If you sort of inherit the car, you learn how to operate the car. This is about driving it. It's about being your own divine self, or the guides call it the Christed self, that aspect within each of us, they say, that's seeking to be realized in fullness. That's the truth of who we are. So this book is about the being of it. I think it differs from the other texts, that it's really one large teaching. I mean, the other books really are sort of breaking things down. This is sort of a direct hit. It also addresses, I think one of our biggest issues is that fundamentally we believe that we're unworthy of our own divinity, of that aspect of us that is connected to everyone and everything else.
Right. Which is what I thought really is such an important message about this book. Something I really want to tap into today when we talk. Let's just back up a little bit more for those people who don't understand channeling. How would you define channeling for those who have never heard the word before?
I don't define it. I mean, I'll say how I describe what I do, perhaps, because I say that I'm a radio. And the guides say we're actually all radios. We're always tuning into different levels of consciousness and broadcasting it. If you're angry, you're tuning into anger and you're broadcasting, that becomes your vibration. I, for some reason, have tuned into some consciousness that teaches through me. So to a certain extent, I'm the medium between that level of teaching and the transmission of it. So think of me as a radio. Channeling is listening and rendering the information that's heard.
How would you differentiate this from what a psychic or a medium does?
Yeah, I do psychic work. The empathic work that I do is psychic. The difference with me, and it's funny, is I mostly work with the living. So I can tune into your sister in Kentucky and tell you what's going on, and often begin to resemble her and step into her field that way. So I'm doing that with the living. The difference is when the guides come through, they're doing that with me. So they become me, or I sort of take on or am almost veiled by that energy that's expressing through me. The thing that I don't do a lot of, and I don't really understand why, is what they call spirit mediumship, which is, people that have crossed will come through. That's just not how I'm operating. So, I'm always sort of surprised when I step into somebody and I say, who's this guy? And he's, dressed up like John Travolta with all these gold chains. It's 1977, and then somebody says, oh yeah, that's my dead brother, been gone for 20 years. Oh, and then it's happening, but I'm still surprised because people that are on this plane come through immediately. The guides come through immediately. It's like it's a different radio station, for me at least, when people have crossed. And, I can tune to it and I can get it, and it happens frequently, but that's not my practice. That is somebody, say, like John Holland's work, and I respect it enormously.
Yeah. All right. Wow. You kind of, you said it earlier, but I want to put an emphasis to it. your guide's reason for wanting to do this?
You know what is their reason? I mean, they're here to teach us who we are.
Yeah.
You know, I think they're invested in what happens to us. They say pretty explicitly in all the books that mankind is at a time of reckoning or a facing of its own creations. You know, we're really looking at we're having to look at what we've done and what we've made here. Yeah. And they're giving us other ways to be engaged with ourselves and consequently with everybody else.
Yeah.
You know, and they're really asking us to examine paradigms that we've accepted as permanent. I mean, they've said recently, you know, in Channel, we as a culture believe that there's always going to be war, and so consequently there will be. We can't believe that we can have a planet without it, and so consequently we're always reinvesting in it. Right. They say that we think that we're our history, and we're not. You know, and as long as we think that we're our history or what we've done or what's happened to us, that's what we continue to create from. And so what they're doing, I think, is bringing us to a new awareness of who and what we are so that both individually and collectively we can choose something differently. And that seems to be the foundation, certainly, of this book, the last book, and was really inspiring to me in that way. So let's extend from that. If we can break down the title a little bit. So what does knowing mean? Well, your knowing's not your thinking. You know, it's always hard for me, and it's a funny thing because people say, you know, sometimes say, well, when you wrote this, what did you mean? I always have to say, well, you know, I didn't write it. You know, I took the dictation. So very often I want to defer to the authors, you know, and sometimes I'll sort of step in and let them take over. But knowing is essentially, you know, thinking is not our knowing. When you know, I'm going to see if I can get it from them, and I shouldn't be channeling. I'm jet lagged, and we'll see what happens. They're saying if you want to know, ask yourself what you want to know. Where's the answer coming from? Where is the answer coming from? What aspect of you is speaking? What aspect of you is speaking? The aspect of you that knows. The aspect of you that knows has no questions. Has no questions. When you know, you're in your knowing. When you know, you are in your knowing, and you are present, and you are present and aware, and an aware way for what is truth, for what is truth. When you are thinking, you are not in your knowing. You are not in your knowing. Tell them this, please. They're saying, you know, tell them this, please. You know, one of the things that they say sometimes when they teach is they'll ask people to go to a time in their life when they knew something. I knew my kid was sick. I knew my marriage was over. I knew I was losing the job. And go into your body and see what that feels like. And then go to your life and think of something that you think. You know, I think I'm hungry. I think I know what I want for lunch. I think I'm going to drive to work today. But there are very different ways of being in your own experience of yourself. Yeah. And so knowing actually, I mean, from what they were saying, if I could catch any of that, you're not operating from a question. You're operating from a place of truth.
And I really agree with that from my own experiences. And I... Early on, when I started to investigate the afterlife, one of the first things I recognized was this idea of knowing, for me, what it meant, and I think we're saying the same thing. I felt like that you gained a knowing from personal experience, whereas you would gain a belief, which is really, you know, an intellectual thing, from vicarious experience, hearing somebody else tell you or teach it to you. But then, and so one of my examples was, you know, you can have a psychic tell you what your past life was. So that's just an intellectual thing, okay, and you can believe it if you want to. But then if you go and have a past life regression with someone, you actually experience that on your own. It becomes a knowing. It's something that, like you said, you don't even question. You just know it at such a deep level that it doesn't matter whether other people believe it or not, because you know it, you know?
Well, I mean, I think that's really well said. You know, I mean, my experience as someone who didn't really believe in anything, you know, I had an experience when I was about 25 of energy sort of moving through my body. It was very, very palpable. I'd heard my first voice probably a month or so before, which was really very distinct and sort of giving me some direction that I needed very, very badly at that time. And again, was very surprised. It all sort of happened in response to sort of opening up and, frankly, in prayer. And, you know, for somebody who didn't believe in anything to sort of go into that model was already a big deal. But to begin to have experiences in response to it was really kind of freaky to me.
Yeah.
So, when I started to feel the energy and then see these lights show up around people, that sent me on a journey, but I couldn't deny it. So, suddenly, I was living in a world where you could suddenly begin to see energy, feel it, and then hear. And that turned my entire life inside out.
Yeah.
Because that meant that the world wasn't the way that I thought it was.
Right.
And, there was a practical period. My friends were saying maybe you have a detached retina, maybe you have a brain tumor, maybe you're detoxing. Any of those things could have been true at that time.
Sure.
But it was enough to sort of move me forward in a way towards this thing, because I knew that it meant that there was more to the world than I ever thought was possible. Now I take a lot of this stuff for granted. I have my petty complaints and stuff, and it doesn't occur to me the fact that I can sort of step into people and work with them telepathically in session is rare, because it's just something that I do. But I actually don't think that I'm special in the least. I think we're all capable of this stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of what my guides have given me is permission, and a lot of what they're able to give other people is permission. And perhaps somebody like me, who comes from a sort of a traditional academic background, it's a little more possible for certain kinds of people to accept that maybe this is so. I'm not wearing a turban. I don't have a big jewel on it. I'm just this guy who's having this very strange experience that, somehow seems to come through with energy that other people can feel.
Yeah.
So when my guides work, the energy's in the room. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's electric.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for that, because I have no interest, frankly, in people deferring to Paul.
Yeah.
I'm not a spiritual teacher. I'm not a guru. I actually happen to be the guy that is an empath and a psychic and operates as a channel when I'm not, doing the laundry or walking the dog.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, so you're the perfect person, and you're the perfect person to make it believable for someone like me, especially when, 15 years ago, I might have been skeptical, because you're just a regular guy. You could be living next door to me.
Yeah. Well, I don't think skepticism is wrong. I mean, I have days when I think it's just nuts. I do. And, I look at the books and, I'm not capable, truly. I mean, no matter how smart I am or eloquent I may be, I'm just not capable of dictating 3 books that require no editing. I don't know anybody that is.
That's right.
With the lectures, it's just not possible. And, the woman who dictated Course in Miracles, there's a quote attributed to her, which I like very much. And she said, I don't believe it, but I know it's true.
Yeah.
And that's how it feels sometimes. I don't believe it, but I know it's true. It's happening.
Yeah.
When it's happening, there's no way around it.
Yeah.
It's so real. It's so present. And even though, I was having dinner with a woman last night who's having a very good experience with the teaching. She's a smart lady. She's a novelist, and she's doing the work. And I said, this stuff is impossible to follow for me some days. I feel like I'm still judging everybody. She said, yeah, but it's true. Everything that they're saying is right. It's about a better way to be in the world and a higher way to engage in everybody. But there is work involved.
Yeah.
This isn't a self-help book. This isn't read a book, you'll feel better. This is read a book and your body might start to vibrate because it works that way. But you're also going to be moved towards facing yourself in some ways that may be a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, I have heard that, and it says it. A lot of people experience a shift just by reading these words.
Yeah.
And certainly. But I agree with you. I mean, when I read this stuff, I don't... there was nothing that I personally disagreed with. It was just I knew that I wasn't necessarily living up to that yet, but it was a great place to strive for. You know what I mean? It was I hope I get there. I hope I get there, and in that way, it was inspiring to me.
Yeah, well, they type in and they say choose, choose, choose. You see?
Yeah.
That's what they say, choose.
I love that, and when they when they repeat something like that, because they do, when it's just to put emphasis on it, right?
That's what I always thought, you know. I mean, they do. They speak in triplets sometimes for emphasis. I thought it was emphasis. I have a friend who is an old-time spiritual medium, Jeanette Meek. She's a wonderful medium, and she says to me, "It's once for the body, once for the mind, once for the spirit. It's got to be 3 times." But one of the things, and it's very true, you know, the attunement to the vibration of the word that they work with in all books, but the first book is that. They do it in the new book as well. They say, "I am word through my body, word I am word through my vibration, word I am word through my knowing of myself as word," really is dealing with the body, mind, spirit. But you're actually claiming that identity and that and a correlation with that vibration, both at the physical level, in the auric field, and in your conscious knowing, which is how we self-identify. I mean, my guides say, you are who you say you are. So if I want to call myself this or that, that's going to be my expression in the world. They're inviting us to attune to the higher level that's available to us.
And so is that pretty much saying the same thing as saying we are who we believe we are? I mean, no.
No, I don't think it is. I mean, I guess you could say that, but you know, they say, the new book, there's a claim that they make that they work throughout the entire book. I mean, it's a claim of truth. They say, I know who I am, I know what I am, I know how I serve. And they do say who you are is who you say you are. But the true self, the divine self, they would say, is eternal. So that's always who you are. Who you believe yourself to be may be how you're manifesting your life right now. But if you begin to move away from the personality self to the true self, you can actually begin to express an accord with that. I mean, it really is about claiming your divinity as your true self. You know, it's not that who we think we are is so wrong. Who we think we are just isn't necessarily the truth of who we are, and it's a much more limited way to be an expression.
All right, so my next question was going to be, I wanted to ask, you know, from the title, what does worth mean?
Yeah.
Is that sort of this idea? I was talking to us about what our true self is. Is there a connection there?
Very much so. I mean, our true worth is as an aspect of the Creator. That's who everybody is, regardless of what they've done or think themselves to have done. You know, that can't be changed. That's true for everybody. If we got that, if I got that I'm made up of the same stuff as the guy that I can't stand, or those people over there who do those things that I so disagree with, we stop operating in separation in the way that we've invested in so much. Now, the guides say that we're worth what we say we are, individually and collectively. So and the world will take you on your value. They say, you know, if you say you're worth $5, the world's going to give you $5 and not a penny more. That's the way it works. Now, if you know who you are in your inherent worth, and they say that's your birthright, the aspect of you that was here to be realized in your fullness, whatever that may be, in your divine worth, they would say. If you know that that's who you are, the smaller structures begin to fall away, because they're mostly built on historical contexts, which means this is who my mom said I was, this is what my father said I should be, the school I went to said I should be doing that. None of that is who we really are. There are ways that we know ourselves in our world, but it's not who we truly are. So your divine worth, or everybody's divine worth, is who they truly are. And the expression of this at a higher level actually is what they say will change your life.
All right, and again, that's what this is all about. That's what this book is all about. The book of Knowing Worth is to, so you know, our father told us one thing, our mother told us who we are, our teachers told us who we are. This is really trying to tell us who we are, is it a remembering? Is it a remembering?
Yeah, it's who you've always been. I mean, they say again and again, you know, we're not making you who you're not. We're showing you who you truly are.
Yeah.
And that's what has been masked in many ways.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's available.
Well, you know, I hope, I always think, you know, I think about these interviews and, you know, I think about what can my audience take away from this? And lately, it's felt like to try to show them, help them see their own inner light, and certainly that's what this is all about. I hope that people will read all 3 books. I'm going to. I haven't read all 3 all the way through because I just got them from your publisher. But I read them enough to get the big picture. And then, but the issue for me was, I just want to read. I just want to start from the beginning and go page by page through all 3 volumes. But it was this volume that inspired me to do that. I was just like, But I was reading the reviews on Amazon about your other 2 books. People love these books. I mean, I just love them. I mean, the transformations have taken place. People see them in that way. I don't read that too much about too many books. You know what I mean? There's something about there, and I know you don't take credit, so you can agree with me, right?
I know what people say. It's what the guides said would happen, and it's happened. But people feel the book's working with them personally and on an energetic level. So, the reviews are saying things like, I'm reading the book and my whole body is vibrating. Yeah. Some woman wrote me the other day, and she said, my husband's reading the book and the light's so intense he has to go lie down. It's really very interesting. But the book is working on the vibrational field or consciousness of the reader in ways that may be palpable for them. I'm not saying this happens for everybody, but a lot of people are reporting that when they read it.
Well, I think you're called to it. Like I said, I always knew about channels, and I just wasn't very focused on channels. Yeah. And so now all of a sudden I'm at a time in my life where, I'm focused on you and I'm led to your books, and I feel like, now the time is right. I'm ready for that now,
I think I wasn't ready for it before, truly. I really wasn't. And I wouldn't be here sitting with you. 5 years ago, I would be hiding under the bed before I would be doing something like this. Yeah. Even my own willingness to claim my ability or whatever it is challenging for me some days, even though I have a very good practice as a psychic and my groups do well, I'm still questioning it all the way through. Yeah. But I do think that we're at a time right now where we're being asked to look for more. And this is one of the ways it's coming. I think it's a positive thing. I think it's happening all over the place. I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. I think you're right. I think, the reason I have an audience is because of that. Yeah. People are out looking for that. Your books talk a lot about Christ consciousness. I was wondering if you could tell me what that means to you, and just specify, I know this is not a religious thing, and
sure,
talk about
it's
that.
Not a religious thing. I mean, one of the things that's happened with the books is the guides are working with a language at times that seems rooted in the Judeo-Christian culture, but they're actually using the language in perhaps different ways than we're used to. And their definition of the Christ is the aspect of the Creator that can be realized in material form, and that's actually in everybody. That spark, that divine light, this little light of mine, whatever you want to call it, is within everybody. And there's a name for it, I believe, in all world religions.
Yeah.
The Shekinah, the divine spark, you just go through it. But essentially, the activation of that aspect of the self, or the awakening of that aspect of the self, and then the expression of it as you, which is what they're speaking of as your consciousness, is in many ways the work of the text. I mean, they say something kind of radical in these books, and at least in the new book, they say, it's not about man becoming Christ. It's about the Christ becoming man. You like to think, and you want to substitute the word higher self. Christ is their word, and some people have baggage. I didn't. I certainly did. I thought that people who went to church were, I grew up in New York. We didn't do that in Manhattan. We didn't do that. But I didn't have a spiritual life because I didn't know I could have one. Yeah. That's me. So the language people can get overly attached to, I think, but I remember what I was going to say, that part of us, I think, that seeks awakening, seeks to be realized. So this is what I'm going to say. If you want to say higher self, you can. But if somebody wants to say, some nice new ager can say, I'm going to be my higher self today, that's fine. But the aspect of you that's choosing that is still operating in personality. Yeah. Now, the higher self operating as you essentially abnegates the personality self to the lower status so that you can operate. You know, one of the first things that I ever heard in channel, and I'm assuming I heard this in channel because I wrote it down, I didn't just read it somewhere and remember it, but it was a very important line, and I was very, very unhappy. I was in my probably early 30s, and I was opening up, I was doing a lot of work, and I heard, "Freedom will come when the throne relinquishes its king." And I had to think for a long time what that meant, but I think what it really was, you know, I think I'm my personality, my ego, self, and that's what's sitting in the throne.
Yeah.
You know, when the true self or the divine self comes forward as us, there's a kind of freedom there, and I think that that's much of what the guides are teaching. Yeah. This can't be so. It's our right. It's our birthright. It's not some crazy mystical thing. In fact, it's who we're all intended to be, and they say can be realized as. But we've got to be willing to do some of the work, and a lot of the work is how we perceive everybody around us. I mean, you know, the guides say, you know, look at everybody around you and see them in their worth. They have a right to be here. They were born, no matter what you think of them. And if you see them all as an aspect of the divine, your whole consciousness is going to shift. Your energy field's going to shift. And if you can do this, you know, if we all did this, first of all, there'd be no war. You wouldn't kill people.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have occurred to you. It's insane.
Right.
I mean, they say we're so screwed up that we build bombs to keep us safe. They say that's crazy. It's just crazy to build a weapon of mass destruction in order to keep yourself safe. If you think of the logic of this, this is really what we've gone to. And they say something very, very important in all the books. And they say, you know, the action of fear is to create more fear. And every time you make a choice in fear, you're actually calling more fear to you. And they say, look at your own lives. Look at something you did because you were scared and see how much more fear you got as a result. And this is why we have all the problems we have in the world.
Sure. And I think everyone listening will recognize that in their own life, how that perpetuates upon itself. What do we do when that's sort of snowballing down the hill and we see ourselves getting into more and more and more fear? Is there a way we can sort of shake our heads, stop ourselves, and work our way back?
They're saying choose, choose, choose. You don't choose. You don't choose. You think you're subjected. You think you're subjected to what happens around you, to what happens around you. That is not so. That is not so. You have a right to choose. You have a right to choose, and what you choose is always based on what you can have. And what you choose is always based in accord with what you think you can have. You want something higher. If you want something higher, claim it. Claim it. You have a right to it. You have a right to it. If you know you have a right to it. If you know you have a right to it, you may choose in a way. You may choose in a new way if you think you can only have what you had. If you think you can only have what you've had, that is all you will claim to yourself. That is all you will claim to yourself, and it will always be thus. And it will always be thus. You have the right to choose new. You have the right to choose anew. You. And they're saying you, everybody has the right to choose new, has the right to choose new if you wish. And I just asked, they said, if you wish. I mean, they just said, you know, can I say this? They're teaching, I know who I am, I know what I am, I know how I serve, which they actually say is an energetic attunement that calls your field or your vibration, your consciousness into present time, will support you in making new choices. Because they say, you know, this is the only moment that you can choose in. This is the only moment. If you say, I know who I am, I know what I am, which is who I am as an aspect of the divine, what I am in this experience, in this situation, in these relationships. How I serve, they say, is how you're expressed as you in your highest way. And these things are always true for you. If you claim that, you can actually make a new choice based on that awareness because you're in present time, you're not operating in your history.
Well, that's interesting. But the probably the challenge in all this is when you say that, I know who I am, I know what I am, you have to see yourself in this highest light because so many of us see ourselves with a little more darkness than that. And
yeah. Yes.
And so the challenge is to, and like you said, but to know that divinity is within us. So that's the leap that we have to make, I would imagine.
You're absolutely right, and that is the teaching of the book. You know, I mean, if you understand, or if I could truly understand, because I'm not saying that I'm there yet either, if I could truly understand that that's who I truly am, you know, and that's the truth for you, a lot of the other stuff literally just moves aside. I'm not operating as it. But what they're saying is it's always true. They're saying it's a claim of truth whether or not you believe it.
Oh,
You know, when the guides do their workshops, they sometimes will say to everybody, you all have a right to be here. You were born.
yeah.
You were born. I mean, what more do you need? You've got the ticket for this expression, for this experience, because you're here. But that doesn't make you special, because everybody that was born has the same right.
Yeah.
The same inherent birthright to value, to their true divine worth. So even though it doesn't seem right, it's still so.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, what I'm realizing when you say it, I'm like, well, maybe it's not such a challenge. Maybe it's not such a challenge. Maybe it's a little easier than I was thinking, and that other people probably are thinking. Sometimes it's the consciousness of knowing where we could be or where we can be. Or I'll give you an example. This is probably a horrible example. It's more of a abundance example. When I first got started in this work, I used to ghostwrite books just to make a living, and I would fly out to the clients, to interview them and everything. And in the contract, if I was going to fly anywhere, they had to pay for the flight.
Yeah.
And what happened was somewhere mid-range of that part of my career, I had some friends, and some friends were taking my wife and I on a trip, and they had all these points, these airline points, and we flew first class for the first time.
Yeah.
And I'm flying first class, and I'm for the first time realizing, oh, this is nice. Oh, this is a lot better than back there. Like, I can see why. And all of a sudden I had there was this new possibility in my conscious mind. And so the next client that I got, I just put in the contract that if I fly, I have to fly first class.
Yeah.
No problem. But before I never would have asked for it, so I never could have got there.
Yeah, you nailed it. You don't need to read the book. I mean, that's the teaching. But they say that's it. You got it.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good. And so that's, again, one of the reasons I love this book, because it shows us those other possibilities. It shows us what the possibilities are that maybe we weren't considering before.
Well, they say something interesting. They say, nothing can be made manifest until it's first a possibility. So one of the things that we have to do is expand what we believe can be possible.
Yeah.
In order for it to be brought through. And it can be a first-class ticket, or a job that gives you joy, or perhaps no job at all, because for some reason we still want to go back and think within the parameters that we've been taught. Like, if I have money, that means I must be employed by somebody else. Well, frankly, says who? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Again, that's another assumption, and we build a life based on that. But if we expand our possibility, what the guides sort of say, this is one of the examples in the book. They say, put yourself in the middle of a circle, and on the outside of the circle, write all the things that you want on the outside. And they say, well, look at this. It's because it's outside the circle, you're actually affirming that you don't have them yet. You know what I mean? You're putting them outside of yourself. If you expand the circle to be inclusive of this, they said, no, the next step is to see all of these things as possibilities.
Yeah.
Because if you don't perceive it as a possibility, you can't create it. Then expand the circle to include it. It's a simple exercise, but it sort of shows us where we say no to what actually can be made so.
Brilliant exercise to see what we think is outside ourselves. But also, do you think it's true if we see something within somebody else, there's some sort of divinity within somebody else, then that could be our reality as well? Or are there certain times when that's that's not the case? Bob, you're never going to be a great artist. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But seeing the divine worth in somebody, people express in different ways. Somebody may think they're supposed to be a great artist, or may have a great love of art, but that's really not how they're here to express fully. Yeah. Sometimes, again, we get into these limited ways of thinking it should be my career that's expressed. Maybe it's the way you are with your friends, or maybe it's the way you serve your community or anything, you know what I mean? Yeah. But we have these sort of narrow parameters of these things. But the question of, do we see the divine worth in everybody? Yes, regardless of what they present. And this is the challenge. The guides say, you can't be the light and hold anybody else in darkness. You can't do it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's the quickest way, and that's not a new teaching, you know, but it's how they say it. And so if you become aware of the divine in others, you're actually giving yourself permission to align to that as well.
Yeah, okay. The book talks about service to a fellow man. Why is that an important message?
Well, I mean, they say I've sort of talked about this a little bit, but they say, you know, I know how I serve.
Yeah.
And everybody comes to me and says, well, I don't know how I serve, you know, and does that mean that I'm supposed to go be a nurse or, you know, go help the poor? And frankly, not necessarily. You know, when you're operating in your higher awareness of yourself and you're expressing that as you, the guides say it actually happens organically. That becomes your service, and you're actually calling to you the opportunities with which to be expressed at that level. So yes, the man or the woman who's the artist, and that's their expression, is actually serving everybody through their creations. But the other thing is, if you're aware of your own worth on a fundamental level, you're actually giving everybody else permission to align to that level just by the doing of it.
Definitely.
It's the being of the example.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. So I'm just going to read it. So I'm going to go back to that sentence. So I know who I am, I know what I am, and I know how I serve. That last part is beautiful because you know, there's lots of people I know who, you know, they're not out, you know, affecting millions of people. They're affecting the people just within their small group. And but when we do that. And I see it. My wife's a great example. Like, man, the love that pours out of her, and I know that just affects the whole world. You know, it just affects the whole world. Not even the ripple effect. I just think that sort of that thing that where they talk. You know, the oneness of it all, I guess. But you know, they talk about if you split a cell in half, you know, and you know it. What happens here happens across the world at the exact same moment. I think that is true for anything, and I feel like my wife affects the world in that way, even though she may only be in contact with a few people. And I think that's true for so many of our audience members. And so I think that last part of that sentence is really super important.
I agree.
I want to ask something that I didn't see in the book. We have a lot of people, part of our audience here on Afterlife TV, who have lost loved ones and they're grieving. And I was wondering if you guys have ever said anything about grief and loss in reference to knowing and worth. Like, what is the value of grief and loss? Because if we're going through that, there must be some value to it. Have you ever run into anything?
I don't think they've talked about it directly. I don't think that they've avoided it. I just don't think it's come up as part of their teachings. But, you know, they've got other books to write, and I assume that they'll get there. I mean, they have talked to people and spoken with people who are, you know, at the end of their lives. I mean, I've had clients that have come through, you know, come to me at that point. And it's really pretty fascinating to hear them talk and, you know, about our own attachment to our physical bodies. And that, you know, we still think that this is who we are, and it's not who we are. I mean, we're spirit, you know. And, you know, they say that this aspect that they're addressing, and I know who I am, I know what I am, I know how I serve, is the eternal self. That's the part that goes on, you know, and we will meet again, you know, and we continue to encounter, as far as I understand it, what we need to continue our soul's growth. So they do talk about the attachment. You know, one of the things that I do some of, which is sort of surprising work, is I get calls to read for people who have family members in comas, because I'm able to hear sometimes. And it's really, really interesting, because it's not like somebody who's crossed, which they're in a different place. There's people that are sort of hanging out in the middle. And what's so interesting is, at times, the lack of investment. I read for a lovely mother and daughter about a year ago who'd had a family member who'd been in a long-term coma, and the woman was really very unattached to coming back into the body.
Oh.
She understood it.
Yeah.
She knew its purpose. She was aware on a certain level of what was going on. And then I read for somebody else much more recently, and it was so interesting because the guy was really angry, and I kept hearing he couldn't get back in his body, and he was trying.
Oh.
And what I didn't know until the follow-up reading was that it was a medically induced coma.
Ah.
So of course he couldn't get back into the body. You know what I mean? He was being kept out of the body, and the guy was like, "Let me back in,"
Right.
and trying to find re-entry. But in terms of grief, I mean, I hate it because I think they're going to say like, well, that's a choice. Do you know what I mean too?
That's true.
Other cultures, they celebrate the passing in a different way. I'm not necessarily there yet. I've got to, I've lost people very close to me. I've got people that I worry about losing still. I'm not all that advanced. I'm going to, if you wish. I just asked if I could ask if there's anything on this, and they're saying, if you wish. They're saying it's about a respect of the one who has passed, a recognition, and a recognition of the role that they played, but it is not necessary. But it is not necessary in tribute. You think it's necessary in tribute to the relationship that was. That is a choice. That is a choice. It is not a tribute. It is not a tribute. It's a reflection. It is a reflection and a rendering of a part of the aspect that was an attachment, that was in attachment, that is challenging. That is challenging when you have been courted in the physical plane, to release what you've known as you, in relationship to others, in relationship to others, how you choose to grieve. How you choose to grieve in some ways is predicated by your training, what you believe you should do, and what you believe you should do if you realize no right way. If you realize there's no right way, and you can move through it quickly or in long term, and you can move through it quickly or in long term, you give yourself some freedom. Period. They're saying period. So I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes brilliant sense. And I've seen more and more of this, or maybe just because I'm an adult now and I didn't see as much of it when I was younger, but there seemed to be a shift about the idea of mourning a death versus celebrating a life when you went to some of these memorial services or funerals, that sort of a thing. And I've seen more of it. And then but then to even take it a step further, no doubt. I mean, that loss affects us. It affects me here. I don't know why that is, but I just feel it there. But even though you can't get rid of that right away, I do think it's helped me with any grief that I've had to, even when you talk about serving, to serve in their honor and in the most positive way that I can, and to, again, a celebration of life, their life, my life, and so, rather than allowing one's death to stop me and put me on hold, to push me forward and live life, because I do believe that that's what they want. Brilliant. Thank you so much for these. For the channelings that you've done. I know you've been traveling. You're just about to do your book tour. You just were on a plane. You're in a hotel room right here, right?
In a hotel room in San Francisco, yeah.
And the energy. Thank you so much for doing that. I'm grateful. I know my audience is really so grateful. I want to show you books again. Again, I'm going to be reading all of them. All right. So I Am the Word. The Book of Love and Creation. Number 2, and the newest book, the Book of Knowing and Worth. If it becomes a matter of finance and right now you have to just choose between one of them, I would go with the last one, the Book of Knowing and Worth myself. Would you agree? I
would agree.
Yeah. And good luck. I hope everybody reads this. I really do. Talk about a celebration of life. I do believe that the wisdom that's in this, and that's what I think. Psychics, they communicate with universal energy, including our own energy. Mediums communicate with spirits. I believe that channels communicate with. Some will call it ascended masters, but entities or group entities to bring through wisdom. And that seems to be the difference for me, is that channels bring through wisdom. It's not so much about us personally, it's about us as a whole. And because it's a whole, it becomes personal to us in that way. I believe that that's what all three of these books do. That the last one I read more of than any of them, and it was inspiring to me. So thanks for taking the time to write it, and because it's a gift to me. Already, it's a gift to me, and I'm going to go back, and I know it'll be more a gift to me. I know it'll be a gift to other people. I do want to. You give psychic readings. Boy, that's something I got to do. People can contact you through your website, which is paulselig.com.
That's right.
All right, and all this stuff will be in the show notes underneath this video. You have many events coming up in the fall, the winter and spring of 2014, right?
Many events.
So we'll make sure there's a link to those as well. I think everybody. Now these events include what? Group channels you can do.
Yeah, I mean they're weekend workshops that are run completely by my guides, where my guides attune people to the energy that they work with and get them working with each other. So for people that have not had an experience of energy, it's often a pretty big experience. And there's evenings, which are sort of introductory workshops. But usually my guides will talk, and then they'll get to work with everybody. So everybody gets to work with the energy that they work with. Beautiful,
beautiful. Anything else you wanted to mention?
No, I'm just so happy to be here.
That's nice. That's nice. I hope we get to meet in person. This was lovely. Yeah. But I'd love to be in your presence, just over some coffee or a pint or something sometime, and just hang out and learn a little bit more about the other things that you do with your teaching and your plays. That's fascinating as well. So thanks again, and maybe we can have you on again. I hope in the future. That would be great.
I'd love to come back. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Paul. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
That's all for another fantastic Afterlife TV episode. Bob couldn't be happier. If you enjoyed this episode as much as Bob, please leave a comment on afterlifetv.com, Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. And don't forget to check out Bob's book, Answers About the Afterlife. Thanks for watching Afterlife TV.